along to the Make It Count podcast. My name is David.
My name's Matt.
We are the Taylor Bros.
Indeed we are. And today we are hopping into one of our favourite genres of episodes, which is a book review. You may have heard of this book. It's quite a well-known one, I would say, by a reasonably well-known author, Ryan Holiday. It's called Stillness is the Key. And of course, this episode is reaching you, hopefully, around the tail end of January in 2024. Suddenly forgot what year it is. We're still at that point in the year. And the things are speeding up again. So, we had the holiday season. Ryan Holiday. We had the Christmas season, the holiday season. Everything goes crazy. And then there's a bit of a lull in the first bit of January, but things start to speed up again. So I thought, good idea to do a book review again. And stillness is the key. How can stillness in our soul, our mind, and our body help us to live life well?
Yeah, so as you said, Ryan Holiday, I think, is a fairly reasonably well-known author. I think he had his background, I think, in copywriting and advertising and peeling that back, but he's gone on a bit of a transformation and really in terms of some of his thinking. And this is one of his books. I don't know if it'd be the most famous of the books he's written. He's written other things like The Obstacle is the Way, and he's big on looking at some of the Greek philosophy and Stoics and stuff. All to say, though, is this, I found, was a really good book, very readable. But I think there's about 30, but short chapters, sort of like 8 pages, maybe 10, some quotes. He's a good writer. The concept, stillness is the key. And basically it's contrasting to the world, which is, and he says this, noisier and busier than ever. So stillness comes at you quietly. The world doesn't. The world is just poof. So he really splits the book up into sort of 3 main domains: stillness of the mind, stillness of the soul, and stillness of the body. First impressions on that, Matt?
Yeah, I like having different domains, because it obviously, whilst we are interconnected, holistic, complex beings, it can be helpful to think about individual areas. So, and I've noticed it myself often. Actually, something that I've come to realize is often when I am actually not moving my body, but not in an intentional way. So I'm maybe stuck in front of the computer for a long time, reading the news or just social media, or even sometimes just work projects. My mind can be racing ahead. And so I've found that sometimes there's this balance between body and mind. So my mind isn't still, but my body is static. It's not necessarily still in an intentional way, whereas when I may be sitting down to meditate or to pray more intentionally, stillness in my body can help stillness in my mind. So I like this interplay.
Yeah, and so basically I'll be telling a kind of an abbreviated version of the stories of how he introduces each section. So the mind, he talks about John F. Kennedy, American president, and October 15th, I think, is 1962. He wakes up and the world has changed because the CIA have discovered that the USSR are building nuclear capability missiles on Cuba. And this becomes sort of the 13 days that known as the Cuban Missile Crisis. But up to that point, he'd been president for about 18 months. It had gone pretty badly, really. Most of the things he tried to invade Cuba, that didn't work. A bunch of other things had happened. He was relatively young for a president, and he'd never held like an executive leadership position before. So there was stuff going on at home, stuff going on in politics. He wasn't in a good place. But when you listen back to the tape recordings of that, everyone says he comes across really calm, really assured. And, he'd read various things, and, potentially this could have been the end of the world, nuclear war, and yet he managed to keep calm, and he was able to realize, well, I don't want to make this worse. But through meditation, many walks through the White House Rose Garden, long swims, he found this stillness that has enabled him to go, what are the Russians trying to do here? Like, this is a bit of a reach, are they overreaching? Like, do they feel cornered? How do I help them uncorner? And so you had the public face of, hey, we've just learned the lessons of what happens from World War II if we don't like face up to confrontation like that. So we have to do that, but we don't want to escalate. We don't want to, oh, they send this and then we go
Yeah.
back. And everyone was telling him, all the military people were going, full scale land invasion, just destroy it. We've got to do it. And he's like, well, how many people are going to die through that? And ultimately, he does the public thing and then he does the private, secret thing and says, look, if you back off a little bit, we'll take down our missiles from Turkey, but we'll do it in like 6 months' time so that it doesn't look like we're abandoning an ally or this was part of it. And so he allows them to feel like they've won. He allows everybody else to come away. And ultimately, he negotiated, but he knew he had to be strong because he was perceived by the Russians to be weak. And so through all of this, the motivations and all of these things, he was able to navigate because he found stillness of the mind. And I thought that was really interesting. And he sort of even thanked the gardener of the White House Rose Garden because he was like, he helped solve this. He created a beautiful place for me to find mental stillness.
Amazing. Wow. And so if a president can find that in what is arguably an incredibly high stress couple of weeks, I'm sure that we can learn a couple of lessons. How can we attain that mental stillness? And as you said, the environment plays a huge part there. He went on swims, he went through the rose gardens.
Yeah.
The thing that I like as well is in that stillness, he identified the position of the other. He was able to enter into an empathy with the other and go, oh, perhaps they are feeling cornered. So perhaps they are acting out of both an opportunity they're seeing him as weak, but also a fear they're feeling pressured. So how can I maintain that position of I'm strong, I'm in the command here, but I will attend to your fear and withdraw that as well. Really interesting.
So the story goes in even more detail. He understands it, and you probably, maybe you're a listener, you remember this or you know this better than I do. I'm just recounting the tale of a tale, really. But the rest of that section, he covers things like limiting your input. That's a chapter. Slowing down and thinking deeply. Start journaling, seeking wisdom, and just cultivating silence. So there's like little chapters on all of those. So it's not just like, how do you do this? It's like, those are the later sections that do that.
Yeah. Excellent.
The one,
so that's stillness of the mind.
Yeah, stillness of the mind was interesting.
Where are we going next, David?
He talked about Tiger Woods, 2008. He's basically at the pinnacle of his career. He's had this calm when he's playing the game. Like he's actually I can't remember I think it was the US Open maybe. He's playing with basically broken bones and an unmovable knee. Like his cartilage and ligaments are done. But he's managed to find this performance calmness. But because of that injury, he has to rehabilitate. And 6 months later, his mistress comes out. They get caught in a hotel room, and everything in his life falls down. It's another 10 years before he is able to win again. And basically, like on the outside, he was still. Performance, he was still, but inside, his soul was broken. He'd been pushed so much. This love from his father is all he really wanted, and he couldn't find that. And so and basically he goes into more detail. People probably know the story better than I do, but basically he said his soul was hurting, his soul was broken, and he didn't have stillness there. And so you've got to heal your inner child. And I thought that was really interesting that, we talk about stillness of the mind, and obviously Tiger Woods was able to do that in a performance setting. But the deeper thing, the soul, the hurting, the broken, meant that it did all still come crumbling down. And so to take that time to do that.
Wow. Gosh, goes deep there. I think that's so true, isn't it? I mean, it kind of brings to mind, there's another quote that's if we don't transform our pain, we'll transmit it. Or the other sort of more famous or more well-known one is hurt people hurt others. And so there is that thing of, so many times we look at people and they look like they've got it all together, and yet underneath the surface is a raging mess. And of course, that's what we feel ourselves. We see on social media or whatever, they've got it together. If only I had them. But actually, I feel a mess. And there's a good chance that every one of us is feeling a semblance of that.
So some of the chapter headings or chapter titles in this section: heal the inner child, accept a higher power, and enter relationships. And so just some things, I like them. It's a very readable book. These chapters are at most 10 to 12 pages long.
Sure.
So
they're easy to sit, easy to read in one sitting, have a thought, kind of chapter a day, think about it. And I like that.
yeah.
What's the last section, Dave?
Stillness of the body. And he talks about Winston Churchill here. It was quite a good quote because someone asked him, what's the secret to your success? And he goes, conservation of energy. Never stand when you could sit, and never sit when you can lie down. Which is funny. Maybe that goes against some of what I believe.
That is brilliant.
I thought it was quite good. But ultimately, he talks about Winston Churchill's life, highly productive, in a number of different ways, like politically and otherwise, and, during World War I and other things. But in 1929, his political career basically came to an end. Out of the public spotlight, out of everything. Nobody wanted to have anything to do with him. For basically a decade.
Wow.
But that moment, that stillness of almost life, the quote unquote lost a decade, was a time when he was able to read so much. He was keeping a track of what was going on in Germany and had read all of those things. He was writing loads. And so even though he wasn't in the public spotlight, he was doing the preparation. And so they were like, he rested really well and he was full on really well. And he had to be at different times in his life. And he was always really organized. But he had hobbies as well. He did bricklaying and he did oil painting, and both of which it was largely agreed he wasn't very good at. Generally, the bricklaying he did had to be redone, and the oil painting, nobody thinks he was a master. But actually, it was stillness of the body that really people close to him said kept the depression at bay as much as anything. And I thought that was really interesting. So that's sort of the way they look at that. And, what do you think?
That is interesting. Well, I'm not sure how still bricklaying is. I'm sure you have to be a little bit active to do that. But of course, it's a fairly monotonous and it's not necessarily a high intensity activity. But again, it's a movement that isn't so demanding that it allows the mind to wander. And there's a different stillness there, isn't there, of letting the mind wander compared to having it constantly filled with inputs. And again, same with the painting. It's a creative output. And I think I'm sure that we'll talk about this sometime this year, but some of the activities that are best for us are those that allow the brain to almost just make these connections in the background. And painting, I'm sure, is one of those activities where just all sorts of things are happening that you won't necessarily notice on the surface or at the conscious mind. So it's an output in a creative way.
And he was writing all of this time. So like some of the journal entries of that time would have been like, hey, written 2,500 words today, laid 500 bricks. This was a great day. I'm going to do this as my routine. And it's just like, that was his thing. He's writing, he's, doing these things. And so some of the chapter titles in this section are quite interesting, but it's take a walk, build a routine, find a hobby, go to sleep. And it's taking care of the body. It's finding stillness in the middle of the noise and the busyness. And I think that's really difficult to do really well. And so I like this book because it's a reminder that is something I want. I want to be the sort of person that is steady and not hectic and frenzy and everything I'm doing. And, people think of Winston Churchill and the sort of World War II war years, and he was incredibly productive, but he wasn't frenzied. He was very organized. And I suppose that all came about, because that's the sort of person we want to be, that can think and meditate and, like JF Kennedy in that moment, that when the big thing happens, you can still be calm and think your way through it and try and understand the situation you're in.
Yeah. It's fascinating because, of course, a small comment, the social trend, the social pressure is be in the spotlight. That's where you want to be. But you think, actually, we've seen many people be in the spotlight far before they're ready. And that's effectively what makes programs like The X Factor and all those shows interesting, is those early rounds. People are in the spotlight and they really shouldn't be. But actually, what maybe is the better thing for us is have that quiet decade, those lost years where we're in preparation. We are preparing in that stillness to be ready for the 2 weeks of craziness, or the, how, you know, that JF Kennedy had. Because I'm sure that he also, it's not likely that he was a completely chaotic person and then those 2 weeks happen and suddenly he goes, maybe I should take up walking and swimming.
Yeah. So, and yeah, exactly. He didn't just do it out of nowhere because the crisis. These were things he was doing that probably anyway.
Yes.
I think I read this book maybe 18 months ago, possibly as much as 2 years ago. So it's interesting going back to it and going, oh yeah, this is a refresher I need as well. What does it look like to find stillness? How do I do that? I journal and you know, have some of those things. And I'd like to think my soul isn't too broken, although, you know, you've probably talked to the people near me.
Dig a bit deeper.
Yeah, dig deeper, yeah. Oh. Anyway,
So one last question I'd ask Dave as we close, before we close out is there any lasting questions you would ask the author?
Maybe if I'd read the book more recently, that would be easier in my head. I think he's in a place where he is very autonomous with his life. You know, he's an author who chooses to write and read a lot, but for most people, they're working a 9 to 5 with a family, and the crafting stillness in the mind and the soul and the body, it could easily feel like that's going to take up a lot of space, and I haven't got space for that. I probably imagine he'd say, have you got space not to have that? Which is,
yeah, what's the cost of not doing?
Yeah, but also, yeah, what if you don't have the bit capacity to redesign your life in a way that allows for flourishing in this area?
Yeah,
I think probably most of us do have a bit more capacity than we think. That's not a very good question, but it's just a thought.
Who's this book for, Dave?
I think it's for people that are seeking a bit of a zag when everyone else is zigging, you know, busyness and noise. And it's like, hey, is there another way? Well, stillness is the key. That's the title of the book. It's definitely worth reading. It's very, like I said, readable and easy to read and get into, and just a chapter of the day, and you know, that's 10 pages and you basically read the book in a month.
Excellent. Well, thanks for taking us through that, David. This has been our book review of Stillness is the Key by Ryan Holiday. Guys, find some stillness this week and let us know what helps you to find stillness in your mind, your body, and your soul. See you next week.